Michelle Carter woke up early that morning, the sun barely peeking through the curtains of her small apartment. She stretched and glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 6:30 a.m., and already she could hear the faint sounds of her kids stirring in their rooms. Her oldest son, Elijah, was probably getting ready for school, while her two younger children, Maya and Liam, were likely still wrapped up in their blankets, dreaming away. Michelle smiled to herself as she got out of bed. Today was going to be a big day. For months, Michelle had been saving every penny she could from her job at the local grocery store. She worked long hours stocking shelves and helping customers, but she never complained. She wanted to give her kids the best life possible, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. And today, all those sacrifices were finally going to pay off. Michelle had saved enough money to buy a car, a reliable one that would make her life so much easier. No more waiting for buses in the rain or walking miles with bags of groceries. A car would change everything. After making breakfast for her kids and packing their lunches, Michelle gathered her purse and the folder where she kept all her important papers, including the list of cars she had researched online. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she loaded her kids into an old borrowed van owned by her neighbor. The dealership wasn't too far away, but the drive felt longer than usual because of how much was on her mind. What if they didn't have anything within her budget? What if something went wrong? Michelle pushed those thoughts aside. She had done her homework, and she knew exactly what she wanted. When they arrived at Prestige Motors, Michelle took a deep breath before stepping out of the van. The dealership looked impressive, with rows of shiny cars lined up neatly under the bright morning sun. There were luxury vehicles on display, sleek and polished, catching the light in ways that made them look almost magical. But Michelle wasn't there for those fancy cars. She needed something practical, something sturdy enough to carry her, family, and cheap enough to fit her tight budget. As they walked toward the entrance, a man in a suit approached them with a wide smile. His name tag read Greg. He shook Michelle's hand firmly and greeted her warmly. At first, Greg seemed friendly and professional, asking Michelle about her needs and offering to show her around. Michelle explained that she was looking for a used car within a specific price range. She handed him the folder with her notes, showing him the models she had researched. But then something changed. Greg flipped through the papers quickly, his smile fading. He looked up at Michelle, his expression suddenly colder. "These are all pretty basic cars," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right place? We don't usually deal with, well, cars like these." Michelle blinked, caught off guard by his words. She glanced down at her kids, who were standing quietly beside her, watching the interaction. "I'm just here to find something reliable," she replied calmly, trying not to let his attitude bother her. "Something that fits my budget." Greg crossed his arms and leaned back slightly, his body language shifting to one of dismissal. "Look, I don't want to waste your time or mine. If you're serious about buying a car, maybe you should try somewhere else. This isn't really the kind of place that caters to people on tight budgets." Michelle felt her cheeks grow hot. Was he refusing to help her because of what she could afford? Or was it something else? She couldn't ignore the way his eyes kept darting to her skin, as if judging her based on something she couldn't control. She tightened her grip on the folder in her hands and tried to stay composed. "I understand," she said softly. "But I'd still like to see what you have available." Greg sighed dramatically, as if Michelle's persistence was inconveniencing him. "Fine," he muttered. "Follow me." He led them to a corner of the lot where a few older cars were parked. They looked worn out, with scratches on the paint and tires that seemed barely functional. Michelle frowned as Greg gestured vaguely toward them. "This is what we've got in your price range," he said flatly. "Take it or leave it." Michelle knelt down to inspect one of the cars more closely. It looked like it hadn't been maintained properly, and she doubted it would last long even if she bought it. She stood up and turned to Greg. "Is this really the best option?" she asked, her voice steady despite the frustration bubbling inside her. Greg shrugged nonchalantly. "Like I said, you might have better luck somewhere else." His dismissive attitude was too much to bear. Michelle felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked at her kids who were staring at her with worried expressions. Maya reached out and grabbed her hand, squeezing it tightly. Michelle forced a smile for their sake. "It's okay," she whispered to them. "Let's go." As they walked back to the van, Greg called after her, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You're wasting your time here. Come back when you're ready to spend real money." People turned to look, some shaking their heads, others pretending not to notice. Michelle ignored him, focusing instead on loading her kids into the van and driving away as fast as she could. Once they were safely on the road, Michelle let out a shaky breath. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white. Her kids were silent in the back seat, sensing her distress. Finally, Elijah spoke up. "Mom, why did that guy treat you like that?" Michelle hesitated, unsure of how to explain such unfairness to her children. How could she tell them that sometimes people judged others based on things like the color of their skin or how much money they had? Instead, she simply said, "Some people aren't very nice, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. We'll find another way." The rest of the ride home was quiet, each member of the family lost in their own thoughts. Michelle replayed the scene over and over in her mind, wondering if she should have said something differently or stood up for herself more firmly. But no matter what she thought, one thing was clear. She wouldn't let anyone make her feel less than she was worth. She deserved respect, and so did her family. Later that evening, as Michelle tucked her kids into bed, she kissed each of them goodnight and promised herself that tomorrow would be a better day. The world might not always be fair, but she had learned long ago that giving up was never an option. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head on, for herself and for her children. The next morning, Michelle woke up feeling heavy, as if the weight of yesterday's events was still pressing down on her chest. She lay in bed for a few extra minutes, staring at the ceiling and replaying the scene at the car dealership over and over in her mind. Greg's dismissive tone, the way he had treated her like she didn't belong there. It all felt so unfair. But Michelle wasn't one to dwell on negativity for too long. She had responsibilities, and her kids depended on her to stay strong. After getting dressed and making breakfast for her family, Michelle sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Her eldest son, Elijah, joined her, his school uniform neatly pressed and his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at his mom thoughtfully before speaking. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly. "You seemed really upset yesterday." Michelle forced a small smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Sometimes people aren't very nice, but that doesn't mean we let them get to us, right?" Elijah nodded, though he still looked worried. "That guy at the dealership shouldn't have talked to you like that," he said firmly. "You work hard, and you deserve better." Michelle reached across the table and patted his hand. "Thank you for saying that, Elijah. It means a lot." She paused, then added, "But don't worry about me. I'll figure something out. We always do." Later that day, while Michelle was busy cleaning the house and trying to distract herself from the frustration of the previous day, something unexpected happened. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and when she picked it up, she saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. Hesitant to answer, she debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of her, and she finally pressed the green button. "Hello?" she said cautiously. On the other end of the line, a male voice spoke. "Hi, is this Michelle Carter?" "Yes, this is Michelle," she replied, her guard going up slightly. "Who's calling?" "My name is Jake," the voice continued. "I work at Prestige Motors, and I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday." Michelle froze. She hadn't expected anyone from the dealership to reach out, especially not after the way she'd been treated. For a moment, she considered hanging up, thinking this might be some kind of trick, but Jake's tone sounded sincere, almost apologetic, and she decided to hear him out. "I'm sorry if this call is inconvenient," Jake said quickly, sensing her hesitation. I wanted to apologize for how you were treated yesterday. What Greg did was completely unacceptable. And I want you to know that not everyone at our dealership shares his attitude. Michelle exhaled slowly, unsure of how to respond. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, her voice calm but tinged with skepticism. Jake hesitated before answering. Because I witnessed what happened and I couldn't just let it slide. When I saw how Greg spoke to you and your kids, it made me angry. Not just because it was rude, but because it wasn't right. You came into the dealership as a customer, and you deserve to be treated with respect. Michelle felt a lump rise in her throat. No one had ever called her out of the blue to apologize for someone else's behavior, especially not a stranger. Part of her wanted to believe Jake was genuine, but another part of her couldn't help feeling cautious. Okay, she said slowly. So, what do you want from me? I want to make things right, Jake replied without missing a beat. If you're willing to give us another chance, I'd like to personally help you find a car that fits your needs and budget. And I promise this time you'll be treated fairly. Michelle frowned, gripping the phone tightly. How do I know this isn't just a sales tactic? She asked bluntly. Jake chuckled nervously. You don't, he admitted. But I can tell you that I'm new to this job and I take pride in doing things the right way. If you decide to come back, I'll show you options that actually meet your requirements, and I won't pressure you into anything. All I ask is that you trust me enough to try again. Michelle thought about it for a moment. On one hand, she didn't owe the dealership anything. They had already shown her disrespect once. On the other hand, she needed a car, and Jake's offer sounded sincere enough to consider. Plus, if things went south again, she could always walk away. All right, she said finally. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon, but if this turns out to be another waste of my time, I won't hesitate to leave. That's fair, Jake said, relief evident in his voice. Thank you for giving me a chance, Michelle. I won't let you down. After hanging up, Michelle stared at her phone for a long time, wondering if she had made the right decision. Her kids noticed her distracted expression when they returned home from school later that evening. Maya, her youngest daughter, tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, what's wrong? She asked innocently. Michelle smiled and ruffled her hair. Nothing's wrong, baby, just thinking about grown-up stuff. That night, as she tucked her kids into bed, Michelle couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty swirling in her chest. Was Jake truly different from Greg, or was he just putting on an act? She didn't know yet, but she reminded herself that sometimes taking risks was necessary. After all, life rarely handed opportunities wrapped neatly in a bow. Sometimes, you had to unravel the mess yourself to find what you were looking for. The next afternoon, Michelle arrived at Prestige Motors with her kids in tow. This time she parked closer to the entrance, determined not to waste any more energy than necessary. As they stepped out of the van, she spotted Jake waiting near the door. He waved when he saw them, his face breaking into a warm smile. Hi, Michelle, he greeted her, extending a hand. Thanks for coming back, and these must be your kids. I've heard a lot about them. Michelle raised an eyebrow, surprised by his friendliness. You've heard about them? She asked, shaking his hand. Jake chuckled. Well, I guessed you had kids based on what happened yesterday. And now I see I was right. He crouched, down slightly to greet Elijah, Maya, and Liam. Nice to meet all of you. I hope you guys like cars. Maya giggled shyly while Liam clung to Michelle's leg. Elijah, however, eyed Jake carefully, as if sizing him up. Michelle appreciated her son's protective instincts, even if they made social interactions awkward. Sometimes, once introductions were out of the way, Jake led them inside the dealership. The atmosphere felt different this time, less intimidating, more welcoming. Jake walked them past the rows of shiny luxury vehicles and toward a section filled with used cars. Unlike Greg, who had barely glanced at Michelle's list of preferences, Jake took the time to review each note carefully. These are some great choices, he said, nodding approvingly. You've done your research. Let's start with the ones you liked best and see which ones are available. For the next hour, Jake guided Michelle through the process with patience and professionalism. He answered her questions honestly, pointed out both the pros and cons of each vehicle, and never once tried to push her towards something outside her budget. Michelle began to relax, realizing that Jake genuinely wanted to help her find the right car, not just close a sale. At one point, while inspecting a silver sedan, Michelle turned to Jake and said, "You know, I wasn't sure about coming back. Here, yesterday was difficult." Jake nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I want you to know that Greg's behavior doesn't reflect who we are as a company, or at least who we strive to be. We're working on improving, and incidents like yours remind us why it's so important." Michelle studied his face, searching for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was honesty and determination. For the first time since entering the dealership, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. By the end of their visit, Michelle had narrowed her choices down to 2 cars. Both were reliable, affordable, and met her needs perfectly. Jake promised to run final checks on them overnight and assured her that she could test drive either one tomorrow before making a decision. As they left the dealership, Michelle felt a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe this experience wouldn't turn out to be such a disaster after all. Her kids chattered excitedly in the back seat about the possibility of having their own car, and Michelle couldn't help but smile. Life had a funny way of throwing curveballs, but sometimes those curveballs led to unexpected blessings. Back at home, as Michelle tucked her kids into bed once more, Elijah looked up at her and said, "Mom, I think Jake seems nice." Michelle kissed his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, I think so too. Sometimes people surprise you in good ways." And for the first time in days, Michelle fell asleep feeling optimistic about the future. The next morning, Michelle woke up feeling lighter than she had in days. The sun was shining brightly through her bedroom window, and for the first time since the incident at the dealership, she felt a flicker of hope. Jake's words from the previous day lingered in her mind. He had seemed genuine, almost too good to be true. But Michelle decided to focus on the positives. If nothing else, he had given her a chance to find the car she needed without being treated poorly. After getting her kids ready for school, Michelle spent the morning tidying up the apartment and thinking about the 2 cars she had narrowed down. One was a silver sedan that looked sleek and practical, while the other was a compact SUV with a bit more space for her family. Both options were within her budget, but she still wanted to test drive them before making a final decision. As she waited for the afternoon to arrive, Michelle couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and caution. She didn't want to get her hopes up only to have them crushed again. When it was finally time to head back to Prestige Motors, Michelle loaded her kids into the borrowed van and drove to the dealership. This time, the familiar anxiety she had felt before was replaced by curiosity. What would happen today? Would Jake follow through on his promises, or would something go wrong again? As they pulled into the parking lot, Michelle spotted Jake standing near the entrance. Just like the day before, he waved when he saw them and walked over to greet them. "Hi, Michelle," he said warmly. "I'm glad you're here. I've got both cars ready for you to test drive." Michelle nodded, grateful for his efficiency. "Thanks, Jake. I really appreciate this." Jake smiled and turned to her kids. "Hey there, Elijah, Maya, Liam, how are you guys doing today?" The children responded shyly, though Liam gave him a small wave. Jake chuckled and said, "Well, let's get started, shall we?" He led them to the first car, a silver sedan parked near the front of the lot. Jake opened the door and gestured for Michelle to take a seat. "This one has low mileage and comes with a warranty," he explained as she climbed inside. "It's great for commuting, and the fuel efficiency is excellent." Michelle adjusted the seat and mirrors, then started the engine. The car purred softly, and she immediately liked how smooth it felt. With Jake sitting in the passenger seat and her kids watching from the sidelines, Michelle took the sedan for a short drive around the block. It handled well, braking smoothly and accelerating without hesitation. When they returned to the dealership, Michelle stepped out of the car with a thoughtful expression. "What do you think so far?" Jake asked, jotting down notes on a clipboard. "It feels good," Michelle admitted, "but I want to try the other one too, just to compare." "Of course," Jake replied. "Let's check out the SUV next." They moved to the second car, a compact SUV with a slightly boxy design but plenty of room inside. Jake pointed out its features, Ample cargo space, all-wheel drive, and even a built-in entertainment system for the kids. Michelle raised an eyebrow, in surprise. "This seems almost too good," she said hesitantly. Jake shrugged. "It's a great deal. The previous owner barely used it, and it's been well maintained. Plus, it fits your budget perfectly." Michelle slid into the driver's seat and took the SUV for a spin. It felt sturdy and reliable, handling turns with ease and offering a comfortable ride. Her kids cheered from the back seat as they imagined road trips and adventures. By the time they returned to the lot, Michelle was smiling despite herself. "Well?" Jake asked, leaning against the hood of the car. Michelle crossed her arms and thought for a moment. "Both cars are nice," she said slowly. "But I think the SUV might be better for my family. There's more space for groceries and the kids' stuff." Jake nodded approvingly. "That makes sense. It's a solid choice." He paused, then added, "Before we finalize anything, I should mention something. Our owner, Lisa Harper, wants to speak with you personally. She heard about what happened yesterday and wants to apologize." Michelle frowned, unsure of what to expect. "Is that necessary?" she asked. "I mean, you've already helped me so much." "I understand," Jake said quickly. "But Lisa insists. She takes these kinds of situations very seriously, and she wants to make sure you feel valued as a customer." Reluctantly, Michelle agreed. Jake led her and her kids into the office area, where Lisa was waiting. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. When she saw Michelle, she stood up and extended her hand. "Michelle, thank you for coming in," Lisa said sincerely. "First, let me say how sorry I am for what happened yesterday. Greg's behavior was completely unacceptable, and I assure you that actions are being taken to address it." Michelle shook her hand, still cautious but appreciative of the gesture. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "It meant a lot to be treated fairly today." Lisa nodded. "We pride ourselves on providing excellent service to everyone who walks through our doors. Unfortunately, mistakes happen, and when they do, we try to learn from them. That's why I wanted to personally oversee your purchase and ensure everything goes smoothly." To Michelle's surprise, Lisa went above and beyond to make amends. Not only did she approve the sale of the SUV at a discounted price, but she also included free maintenance checks for the first year and upgraded the warranty at no extra cost. Michelle could hardly believe her ears. "This is incredible," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I wasn't expecting any of this." Lisa smiled gently. "Consider it our way of apologizing and showing you that not everyone here shares Greg's attitude. You deserve respect, Michelle, and I'm glad we could turn things around for you." By the time they finished signing the paperwork, Michelle felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her kids were thrilled, running around the dealership parking lot and pretending to drive their new SUV. Even Elijah, usually reserved and serious, grinned as he helped load their belongings into the trunk. As they prepared to leave, Jake approached Michelle one last time. "You have my number if you ever need anything," he said, handing her a business card. "And remember, you're always welcome here." Michelle smiled, genuinely touched by his kindness. "Thank you, Jake, for everything." Driving home. In their new SUV, Michelle felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The past few days had been emotionally draining, but they had also taught her an important lesson. Sometimes people can surprise you in the best ways. Despite the challenges she faced, she had found allies in unexpected places, people who cared, enough to stand up for what was right. When they arrived home, Michelle parked the SUV in front of their building and turned off the engine. Her kids unbuckled their seatbelts and raced toward the apartment, eager to tell their neighbors about their new car. Michelle stayed behind for a moment, staring at the steering wheel and letting the reality sink in. She had done it. Against all odds, she had found a reliable vehicle for her family, and she had done it with dignity. Later that evening, as Michelle tucked her kids into bed, Maya hugged her tightly and whispered, "Mommy, I love our new car." Michelle kissed her forehead. "Me too, baby, me too." Exhausted but content, Michelle sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed and reflected on everything that had happened. Life wasn't perfect, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But for now, she allowed herself to enjoy the moment, to celebrate the small victories that reminded her of her strength and resilience. The days following Michelle's purchase of the SUV were a whirlwind of emotions. At first, she couldn't stop smiling every time she climbed into the driver's seat. The car smelled new, handled smoothly, and gave her a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. Her kids loved it too, especially Liam, who insisted on sitting in the back row with his toys spread out around him. For once, life felt a little easier. But as the initial excitement settled, Michelle began to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about Greg's dismissive attitude and how he had made her feel small and unworthy. She replayed Jake's apology in her mind, wondering if he truly understood the weight of what he had done, or rather, what he had tried to fix. And then there was Lisa, the dealership owner, whose sincere apology and generous gesture had restored some of Michelle's faith in humanity. It was a lot to process, and Michelle found herself torn between gratitude and frustration. One afternoon, while driving Maya and Liam to their weekly art class, Michelle noticed something unusual. A local news van was parked outside Prestige Motors, its camera crew setting up equipment near the entrance. Curious, Michelle slowed down slightly, but she didn't think much of it at the time. After dropping off her kids, she headed to the grocery store to pick up supplies for dinner. As she pushed her cart through the aisle, she overheard snippets of conversation from other shoppers. "Did you hear about that car dealership?" one woman asked her friend. "No, what happened?" the friend replied. "Well, apparently they kicked out this mom and her kids because she didn't have enough money or something. Now everyone's talking about it." Michelle stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. Was someone spreading the story of what had happened to her? She quickly grabbed the item she needed and hurried home, anxious to see if the news had picked up on it. When she turned on the TV later that evening, sure enough, the incident was the top story on the local channel. The reporter stood outside Prestige Motors, holding a microphone as the camera panned over the dealership's shiny vehicles. "A recent incident at this popular car dealership has sparked outrage in the community," the reporter began. "According to sources, a black mother and her children were allegedly mistreated and turned away due to discriminatory behavior by an employee. The dealership has since issued a public apology, but many are calling for greater accountability." Michelle watched in stunned silence as footage of Lisa Harper appeared on screen. The owner looked composed but visibly shaken as she addressed the media. "We deeply regret what occurred here," Lisa said firmly. "Such behavior does not reflect our values as a company, and we are taking immediate steps to ensure this never happens again." The segment ended with a brief interview with Jake, who spoke passionately about fairness and respect. "Everyone deserves to be treated equally," he said. "What happened to Michelle was wrong, and I'm just glad we could make things right." Michelle turned off the TV, her mind racing. She hadn't expected the situation to blow up like this. Part of her felt uncomfortable being at the center of attention, while another part of her recognized the importance of shining a light on such discrimination. If sharing her story could help prevent others from experiencing similar treatment, then maybe it was worth it. The next day, Michelle received several calls from reporters asking for interviews. At first, she declined, unsure of whether she wanted to relive the experience publicly. But after talking it over with Elijah, who encouraged her to speak out, Michelle decided to share her side of the story. She agreed to meet with a local journalist, named Sarah, who promised to handle the interview with sensitivity. When Sarah arrived at Michelle's apartment, she greeted her warmly and thanked her for agreeing to talk. "Your story is inspiring," Sarah said. "People need to hear it." Michelle nodded, though she still felt nervous. They sat down at the kitchen table and Sarah began asking questions. Michelle recounted the events at the dealership, the condescending remarks, the dismissal, the tears, and explained how Jake and Lisa had stepped in to make things right. She also shared her thoughts on why speaking out mattered. "I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did that day," Michelle said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "It wasn't just about buying a car. It was about being treated like I didn't belong because of my skin color and my financial situation. That's not okay." Sarah listened intently, nodding as she jotted down notes. When the interview ended, she thanked Michelle for her honesty and promised to write a fair and balanced article. True to her word, the piece ran in the local newspaper the following week. It highlighted Michelle's resilience and the positive changes happening at Prestige Motors, including Greg's termination and the implementation of stricter anti-discrimination policies. The response from the community was overwhelming. Strangers reached out to Michelle, praising her courage and thanking her for bringing attention to the issue. Some shared their own stories of being mistreated based on race or income, while others expressed support for holding businesses accountable. Michelle was humbled by the outpouring of kindness, though she remained focused on her family and their future. Meanwhile, Prestige Motors underwent significant changes. Lisa Harper took full responsibility for the incident and worked tirelessly to rebuild trust with the community. She hosted town hall meetings where customers could voice their concerns and suggestions, hired diversity trainers to educate employees, and introduced a mentorship program aimed at supporting underrepresented groups in the automotive industry. Jake, now promoted to a managerial position, played a key role in these efforts, ensuring that every customer received the respect they deserved. For Michelle, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a life-changing event. Having a reliable car made a world of difference. She no longer had to rely on borrowed vans or public transportation, which saved her time and energy. She could take her kids on weekend outings, visit family members who lived farther away, and even explore new job opportunities that required a commute. One Saturday morning, Michelle loaded her kids into the SUV and drove them to a nearby park. It was a sunny day, and the playground was bustling with activity. As her kids ran off to play, Michelle sat on a bench watching them with a content smile. Elijah joined her after a few minutes, sitting quietly beside her. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" he asked. Michelle glanced at him and ruffled his hair affectionately. "Just how lucky we are," she said softly. "We've been through a lot lately, but we made it through together." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think things will keep getting better?" Michelle hesitated before answering. Life wasn't perfect, and challenges would always arise, but she chose to focus on the positives, the lessons learned, the allies gained, and the strength she discovered within herself. "I hope so, sweetheart," she said finally. "And even if they don't, we'll face whatever comes our way. Together." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden rays across the park, Michelle felt a deep sense of peace. She had fought for her dignity, stood up for her family, and inspired change in ways she never imagined. While the road ahead might not always be smooth, she knew one thing for certain: she was capable of overcoming anything. That night, as Michelle tucked her kids into bed, she kissed each of them goodnight and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Life had tested her, but it had also shown her the power of resilience and compassion. And for that, she was endlessly thankful. Weeks turned into months, and Michelle's life continued to improve in small but meaningful ways. The SUV proved to be everything she had hoped for: a reliable companion that made her daily routine easier and allowed her to spend more quality time with her kids. Maya loved riding in the back seat, pressing her face against the window as they drove past parks and stores. Liam often pretended he was steering the car from his booster seat, giggling uncontrollably. Even Elijah, who usually kept to himself, enjoyed the family outings they could now take without worrying about bus schedules or long walks. But beyond the practical benefits of owning a car, Michelle noticed something deeper changing within her. She felt stronger, more confident. The experience at Prestige Motors had shaken her at first, but it also reminded her of her resilience. Standing up for herself, and seeing others stand up for her, had given her a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that speaking out wasn't just about seeking justice. It was about creating a better world for her children. One evening, as Michelle sat on the couch flipping through channels, she stumbled upon a local news segment featuring Prestige Motors. The dealership had partnered with a non-profit organization to host a community day, offering free car maintenance workshops and discounted services to low-income families. Lisa Harper appeared on camera, smiling warmly as she explained the initiative. We want to give back to the community and show that everyone deserves access to safe and reliable transportation, she said. Michelle smiled to herself, feeling proud of the role she had played in prompting such change. She picked up her phone and sent Jake a quick text. Saw the news. Looks like things are really turning around over there. Jake replied almost immediately. Couldn't have happened without you, Michelle. Thanks again for trusting us to make things right. As much as Michelle appreciated Jake's words, she knew the real credit belonged to her own determination, and to the countless people who had supported her along the way. Her story had resonated with so many others, sparking conversations about fairness and equality in places she never expected. Local schools invited her to speak at assemblies, where she shared her experiences with students and encouraged them to stand up for what was right. Community leaders reached out to collaborate on initiatives aimed at addressing systemic discrimination. Even strangers stopped her in the grocery store to thank her for inspiring them to speak out when they witnessed injustice. Despite all the attention, Michelle remained humble. She didn't see herself as a hero, just a mom trying to do her best for her family. Still, she couldn't deny the impact her actions had made. Slowly but surely, her voice had helped create ripples of change that extended far beyond her own life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Michelle decided to take her kids to the same park where they had celebrated their new car months earlier. The leaves were turning shades of orange and red, carpeting the ground in vibrant colors. As her kids ran ahead, chasing each other around the playground, Michelle spotted someone familiar sitting on a nearby bench. It was Jake. She hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Hey, Jake," she said, smiling. "What brings you here?" Jake looked up, surprised but pleased to see her. "Oh, hey, Michelle. Just taking a break from work. Thought I'd enjoy the weather while I can." Michelle laughed. "You deserve it. You've been working hard." They sat together for a while, chatting casually about life and catching up. Jake told her about the progress at the dealership, the new policies, the training programs, and the growing number of satisfied customers. He confessed that some days were challenging, especially when dealing with pushback from older employees resistant to change. But overall, he felt hopeful about the direction things were heading. "I have to admit," Jake said after a pause, "you inspired me to keep pushing forward. Seeing how you handled everything, it reminded me why I got into this line of work in the first place." Michelle blushed slightly, touched by his words. "I'm just glad I could help in some small way," she replied. "It takes people like you to make real change happen." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, funny stories from the dealership, updates on Michelle's kids, plans for the upcoming holidays. For a brief moment, Michelle forgot about the challenges they had both faced and simply enjoyed the connection they had formed. Despite their different backgrounds, they shared a bond rooted in mutual respect and understanding. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Michelle glanced at her kids playing happily in the distance. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I think about how differently things could have gone. If you hadn't stepped in that day, I might still be stuck waiting for buses or borrowing vans from neighbors." Jake shook his head. "Don't give me too much credit. You're the one who kept going even when it wasn't easy. That kind of strength is rare, Michelle." Michelle smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She thought about the moments that had led her here, the frustration, the tears, the victories, and realized that every step had been worth it. Life wasn't perfect and challenges would always arise, but she had learned to face them head-on with courage and grace. Before leaving the park, Michelle hugged Jake goodbye and promised to stay in touch. As she gathered her kids and headed toward the SUV, she felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the car but for the journey it represented. Owning the SUV had been a turning point, yes, but the real gift was the lessons she had learned along the way. That night, as Michelle tucked her kids into bed, she paused in the doorway of their room, watching them sleep peacefully. Elijah stirred, slightly, murmuring something in his dreams while Maya clutched her favorite stuffed animal close to her chest. Liam lay sprawled out, his tiny hands curled into fists. Michelle felt her heart swell with love for them. "You guys are my greatest adventure," she whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair from Maya's forehead. No matter what happens, we'll always stick together. Closing the door gently, behind her, Michelle returned to the living room and sank onto the couch. She pulled out her journal and began writing down her thoughts, something she had started doing recently as a way to process everything she had been through. Tonight, she wrote about hope, resilience, and the power of standing up for oneself. She wrote about the importance of kindness, not just toward others, but also toward oneself. And she wrote about the future, a future filled with possibilities, challenges, and triumphs yet to come. By the time she finished, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Michelle closed her journal and leaned back, letting out a contented sigh. Life had thrown its share of obstacles her way, but she had faced them with determination and grace. More importantly, she had taught her kids valuable lessons about strength, empathy, and perseverance. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Michelle felt a profound sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. For certain, she was ready for whatever came next. Together, she and her family could handle anything.